Right, so this is for anyone who missed going through dirt time, or we haven't had time because you're having an extended half term. So you should have your red pen ready to add in any answers. You can also give yourself a tick for anything that you've done really well. So the first question asked about looking at two pie charts that show present day atmosphere on Earth and compares it with early atmosphere formed billions of years ago. Okay, so if you look at the two, this is early atmosphere, so remember when there was loads of volcanoes, this is today's atmosphere. So if we're comparing them, there's a lot more oxygen in today's atmosphere, more nitrogen in today's atmosphere, less CO2, and there's no sulfur dioxide in today's atmosphere. Moving on then to the next question. This was a little bit complicated because you had to really look at the diagram to work out what was going on. Okay, so volcanoes emit CO2. So there's your volcano and you can see it's emitting CO2. Okay, then what happens is then plants take in the CO2 and release it as oxygen via the process of photosynthesis. Moving on to a nice easy question then. Most people got this right. Looking at the three boxes, so nitrogen is the big one, it's about 78, oxygen's a little one then, about 21, and then argon is the tiny one, which is less than 1%. Next question then was a diagram of different points of the Earth's movement, and it asked you to put them in order. So nearly everyone got this right again. So C is the starting place Pangaea, then we move on to D, which is where they start to kind of split into two continents, then A, where they're a little bit split, and then B is the final, what we end up with now. Describe two pieces of evidence that we're going to use to support his theory of continental drift. Continents fit together like a jigsaw, similar fossils and rocks found on different continents. If you just wrote similar fossils or similar rocks, you wouldn't have got them out because you need to say they were found on different continents. You can't just write similar fossils. What happens when two plate boundaries slide past each other? That causes earthquakes. Getting a little bit more complicated now. So this question was looking at two plate boundaries and it mentioned they were destructive plate boundaries. Describe what happens to these plate boundaries. So I've got 3 bullet points. Remember, write everything you know about it. So at a destructive plate boundary, the plates move together. The more dense plate is forced underneath and melts in the mantle. Mountain ranges are formed. Okay. Draw a cross on the diagram to show a constructive plate boundary. So constructive plate boundaries are when they're moving apart. So there's one there, one there, one there. Or you could have also had one there. Okay. So where they're moving apart and that one at the top. So where they're moving apart. And then it says describe what happens at this boundary. Plates move apart, magma rises, new rock is formed. Okay. State one effect, a plate sliding past each other, sliding again. That's conservative plate boundaries, earthquakes. The next question then kind of formed, was part of the question on the next page. The first thing you had to do was draw a trend line. So that was for 1 mark. Not many people did it. Trend line is a straight line which fits in as many bars as possible so you can see what's happening to the bars. So I know they're not completely increasing, but over time there's quite an increase. So that's why we call it a trend line, so you can kind of put a line in and see that it's increased. It's not a line, which loads of you did, where you just like join them all up like this. No, it's not like a squiggly line. It is a straight line that shows the trend, shows what's happening in the diagram. So that's for the first mark on this question. Then it says, suggest why there was a large rise in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. 2 things were mentioned in the text on the previous page. Deforestation, so less CO2 is absorbed via photosynthesis. That was 1 mark. And then industry growth, burning more CO2 for cars, trucks and electricity. That was a 2nd mark. Okay. Give one way we are trying to reduce carbon dioxide emissions using renewable energy, walk, don't drive. There were loads of different things, but they were the main 2 that I thought of. This question then relied on you reading the previous page. Okay. Some people suggest that changes in carbon dioxide levels are not responsible for global warming. Tick the X, the statement that supports this opinion. The mean global temperature remained constant between 1950 and 1980. Okay, so there was no change in the mean temperature, so how could CO2 emissions, which really increased in the 1950s, cause it? You might want to pause it now, okay, so you can make sure that you definitely get the answer down to this, okay? With these questions, QER means that 1 mark comes from quality of written communication, so full sentences, capital letters, correct spelling. But I've just kind of bullet pointed the things that I would have liked to have seen that would have got you 5 marks anyway, okay? But pause the screen and make sure you write it in your red pen. So photosynthesis, increase of oxygen, decrease of CO2. Respiration, decreases oxygen but increases CO2. Two processes keep CO2 levels very constant. So if these two processes were the only thing happening, you'd have a really constant balance of oxygen and CO2. However, human activity such as combustion of fossil fuels, which uses O2 to burn fuels and releases CO2. Okay, that's a big problem that we've had. Also, deforestation to make place for roads and homes means less photosynthesis, so increased CO2 in the atmosphere. And then I kind of did like a summary sentence at the bottom. This means there is an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere and O2 levels decrease. CO2 is stuck in the atmosphere, causing global warming. Final question then, can we make sure we're using a calculator? You can ask for one in science. So this one you had to add up all the percentage you already had, which should have given you 65, and then taking it away from 100, because that's what the whole pie chart would represent. A couple of you wrote 32. Can you be really careful? 35. Use a calculator. Explain why scientists are concerned about the release of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide gets trapped in our ozone layers. Sun rays can't reflect, causes the earth temperature to rise. Suggest one way to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases released in the atmosphere due to electrical generation. Okay, so you can't use like cars and stuff, because that's not electricity generation. So carbon capture or renewable energy would have been the big two to write there. Finally, again, I'd like you to pause the screen, because these were the core knowledge questions that you were given. You should have learnt the answers to these. Okay, they were a little bit jumbled up, but that's the point of the core knowledge. But you should have learnt them. I had loads of you writing true or false by here. You had to name the plate boundaries. Okay? But if you've got any questions or you think you've been wrongly awarded a mark, please just come see me.